Hey there, I'm Mike. I'm an amateur artist and I'm trying to be a professional. In particular, I'm trying to publish my own manga. On this channel, I also like to kind of document my progress along the way, and I give kind of art tips as I learn them. So if that's something that you're interested in, please go ahead and subscribe. And in today's video, I'm actually going to be doing something from a recommendation and a comment from Adam. He says, I'm having problems with lines where my lines look too uniform, but I'm trying to get to Cantaro's art style, and asks, can you do a manga art style review? That's exactly what I'm going to do here. Adam actually in a later comment talked about a few people that he'd like to see. I added 2 of those recommendations in and 2 of my own. So let's get started. First, we're going to be looking at the artist from I Am a Hero. So, from a review standpoint, I think Adam in the comments stated that this was much different than typical manga styles, and I would have to agree. And the biggest difference between this and other manga styles is that this is a more realistic kind of art style. And I don't know much about this manga. I've never read it, but some of the stuff that I saw, it seems like there's like zombies and things like that. It looks pretty cool, really. But for that kind of style, you do have to, or for that kind of story, I should say, you do have to probably have a style that is a little bit more realistic. Why do I say that? Because when you have things like zombies and people fighting zombies, a lot of stuff, there's going to be like a lot of gore and stuff like that in it, and you're not going to be able to capture that kind of like grotesqueness, I guess, if it's not pretty realistic to start from. But here, let me go to the next panel. I can show you kind of what I'm talking about here. So the head, for instance, this is one of the most realistically drawn manga style heads I think I've seen in manga. I mean, there are definitely other ones that are really hyper realistic, but as far as a style that's going to be reproduced over and over again, this is pretty realistic, and it's much different than some of the later styles that I'll show. The proportions are pretty much perfect for the average human body for both of these characters. Expression is there too. Something that typically gets pushed back in manga style is like nose structure and lip structure in particular, and they also like leave a little bit more space for larger eyes, because eyes are going to give you like a good portion of your expression and things like that. And as you can see here, like her eyes are slightly exaggerated, but his eyes aren't really exaggerated too much, right? They're pretty much what you would find in a typical human being. And instead they have the structure for the nose. You can see nostrils, you can see the flare out right here, the wing of the nose, and you can see full lips on both. So that is what's going to kind of contribute to the uniqueness of this style. So really it's not like the style is unique for manga, but it's actually not a super unique style in my opinion, because it's bordering on almost being like what I would call like semi-realistic to realistic. So the stylization isn't really stylization. It's just how this particular person would draw fairly realistic things in a slightly simplified way. Now that is what stylization is, but it's not to the extreme that you would see in manga. So let's look at one more by him. So this is what I meant earlier when I was saying that like when you have gore and things like that, it has to be somewhat realistic so that you can have like the grotesqueness of it. So we see this creature here, this like zombie like creature or whatever it is. Like I said, I don't know much about the story, but one of the things that really stands out is that its limbs are made out of actual human limbs, and it's like fingers are human arms with hands and fingers attached to them, right? And the way that this is all drawn and it's all like kind of put together you can see like the individual elbows in each one of the limbs as it goes down, and that doesn't really happen without having a really good knowledge and understanding of human anatomy for particularly the arm. So that is that style. Next we'll go to Berserk and Cantaro style. So I would say this is slightly more stylized, not much, but slightly more stylized. I picked this panel to show first because I think that what Cantaro does fantastically well is shading. While I would say this style is a little bit more light on the shading and more realistic on the line work, this and structure, this one is like realistic proportions, but a heavy emphasis on shading and cross hatching, and it makes for these really gorgeous like gradients within the pieces. Like you can see right here, you can feel the roundness of this armor right here. You can really feel the emphasis on some of the shading going away as this gigantic sword is being swung. And it's just like, it's absolutely gorgeous. Like this art style is beautiful, and it's something that would be extremely difficult to replicate. But one thing that you can kind of pull from it, and I'll go to the next one. One thing you can kind of pull from this art style is it's heavily based in, again, realism and structure. So for instance, Guts, like you can see that this part of the head right here where you would do your Loomis method head, you can really see the structure of the skull right here, right? So this piece right here, your like ocular bones, they create this dip right in here, and that's the dip that you're kind of seeing before it comes out and then comes back around and comes down to where it meets where the mandible actually is, and it goes down and into where your teeth are. So that's like the top half of the skull, and you can see all of that structure within the shading. So the reason why it might be difficult to replicate this particular kind of style is because there is intense knowledge of anatomy, structure, bone anatomy, musculature, all of that stuff is in here, and in order to be able to shade things like Cantaro did, would be you'd have to have a firm understanding of these structures and how they would be shaped and stuff like that in order to be able to shade them like this, because without that knowledge you can't shade the way that he does. And then this is like absolutely gorgeous. The one thing that can be a little bit difficult when you have this much structure in your drawings, because there really is a lot, you can really feel the rigidity of this armor, is you can tend to lose the motion that you get with your drawings. Like that's one thing that will happen if you don't do your gestures well enough with enough fluidity. When you put bones, or not bones, but like muscles and clothing, and in this case armor on top of it, you typically get this really static looking drawing. The way that he combats this is he has this really like fluid way of drawing the limbs. As you can see, the upper arm where the femur is really bent this way. It's almost unnatural how much it's bent like this. And then down at the bottom, you can see it flows like this, right? So the ulna and the radius both flow with this flow of the, did I say femur? I meant humerus. I always do that. With the humerus, right? So the humerus is flowing like that, and then the radius and ulna flow with it. And the same thing right here, right? The tibia and fibula, they really curve in. This is an unnatural curve. Your leg does not curve quite this much, but it needed to be done in order to make this drawing not look so static, right? So that's one thing that you can also do to try to replicate. As far as line work is concerned, Cantara uses very, very thin lines with everything, and the way that he makes his figures actually pop isn't with the line work per se, it's actually with his shading and cross-hatching style, which again, I'm probably going to say this a billion times, but that has to do a lot with the structure, the underlying structure within your drawings. That's the only way that you'd be able to get this kind of like expertise in shading. Just absolutely beautiful work. Next, this one's kind of for me. It's a style that I'm going to be studying a lot because I love it. But Araki's style for JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. So one thing, and I wish I could have posted this, but you can look it up online. If you go online and just look up JoJo's Bizarre Adventures and look up like the manga panels, at some point it'll pop up a comparison between Araki's like beginning of each like part and the end of each part, going all the way up until the most current part that he's at. And what's really beautiful about his art is you can tell that he heavily uses reference. And the reason why I say that is because the improvements that you see in his drawings over time, only somebody who is using consistent reference would be able to do that. So that's something that you do need to keep in mind as you're trying to replicate styles, is that if you don't have a foundation with references, you're not going to be able to replicate people's styles very well, because you don't know what they are kind of doing as far as their actual stylization is concerned. Like with this style, I would say again, his style is very realistic, but there are things that are exaggerated. The eyes are slightly exaggerated. The figures itself, and I'll go to this. His figures are really exaggerated. They're almost bordering on each and every panel being like a model-like figure. And I was going to say that that is where I think that he gets his references from. I think that he gets his references from like model poses and like bodybuilder poses, because they're very, every single pose is super stylized but super dramatic as well, and it makes for a very interesting looking piece in my opinion. But the other thing with him too is, again, and I know this is like, I'll probably stop saying it after this because it's just literally every single person, but the structure that he draws with creates this great foundation for his shading and folds and things like that. So that, again, just keep that in mind. You have to have that structure, you have to have that knowledge on anatomy if you want to be able to replicate people's stuff. And let's look at the last one. So again, the reason why I like kind of pulled this one up is because of the immense amount of studying that has to be done in order to create good pieces. So there's no reference in the world that's like this for a motorcycle being destroyed and then put back together, which is what's happening in this scene. The way that he was able to replicate this was he had to literally sit down and study the intricate pieces of a motorcycle in order to be able to draw this stuff the way that he did. Rowan in Diamond is Unbreakable, if you look at his character is the perfect example of the madness that goes behind being a manga artist. You have to like really just delve into the work. You have to study constantly. You have to be willing to learn different things and use reference. But anyways, that's why I put this panel up. Again, just beautiful artwork. And last but not least, Kohei from My Hero Academia. The one thing that I really want to pull from this is his style is by far the most stylized. But again, like I said I wasn't going to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. The structure, you have to understand proportions and things like that in order to be able to toy around with the rules. Because if you don't, you're going to end up making something and you're not going to be able to consistently make it. So let's go to the next panel. Another thing that is really beautiful about his work is he's not scared to draw one of the most intimidating things to draw, which is hands. He's not scared to draw hands, and he draws them very well. That's something you have to think about too. What are my weaknesses, and how do I improve upon those? So that's, again, keep that in mind. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about was, there's actually two things. Again, hands right here. His character design is some of the best I think I've ever seen as far as manga is concerned. I think that My Hero and JoJo's, both of them have fantastic character designs, but I think that his character design is a little bit better. Why do I say that? So let's go back to this first one. Bakugou is an explosive character both in his magic and in his personality. So how do you portray that in a character? Okay, let's give him extremely spiky hair. Let's make his magic explosive to match his explosive personality, and then let's make his attire explosive as well, having this gigantic grenade at the end for like a gauntlet, having these like, I mean, I don't even know what you would call this, but this almost looks like gun holes or something like that, like very rigid, very like heavy duty and metal bound, and again it just kind of makes you feel like he's a super explosive character. Even this like wing in the back of his head looks like an explosion from the back, right? All of those things are super important, and what you should be thinking about in your character design. And last but not least, I want you to see, and this has been something through all of them, but I think this particular panel is like really highlighting it. Emotion being like put into every single character. So you have him right here. He's looking extremely worried about the task that's ahead of them. There's somebody obviously that they're fighting against together, and something wrong is happening, and he's using his quirk to protect him, and he's down, and you can kind of tell like an explosion occurred, and his hair is like kind of all over the place. And then you have his quirk, and his quirk doesn't like light, and you can see his quirk is crying almost or wincing in pain as it's trying to protect him right here. So all of those things are extremely important to think about. Every character should be having some kind of reaction, some kind of feeling, emotion in each and every panel that you draw. But anyways, that is my breakdown of 4 different artists. If y'all like this kind of video, just go ahead and comment down below. I'd be willing to do some more like this. This is like a fairly easy video for me to do. But anyways, again, I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a thumbs up if you did. And other than that, I'm Manga Mike, and I'm out.